with it then. We'll see what happens. All right, so should we just coexist? Bible on apologetics, polemics, and evangelism. I find that Christians are usually pretty unanimous on evangelism, not quite as much on apologetics. I do see people, lots of Christians think that it has something to do with apologizing. Like, oh, I'm preaching the gospel, I'm really, really sorry, so I have to do this. And so I see them putting, advertising their sermons, preaching the gospel without apology, like they're against apologetics. No, apologetics has got zero to do with apologizing. And significantly less agreement on polemics. So polemics is, of course, criticizing other positions and showing why they're wrong. Have you seen these bumper stickers? You familiar with these? Now, depending on what you mean by that, it could be a good idea or a really stupid idea. If you mean, hey, let's all coexist, not be slaughtering each other and so on, and that's a pretty good idea, but I don't know why you'd be telling people that in the U.S. Right? We're actually really good at not going around slaughtering each other over our beliefs and so on. And so if you look at history, we're among the best that's ever been on not going around killing each other over disagreements and so on. So I don't know who you're even trying to lecture here. But I don't think that's what they're trying to say. I think it's more along the lines of stop disagreeing with each other and trying to convert each other and telling people what to think and what to believe, and just coexist, just get along. Do you see how hypocritical and stupid that is right there? So Christians are commanded to preach the gospel to people, and more, as we're about to see. Muslims are commanded to invite people to Islam, and more, unfortunately. But if you tell them, hey, stop doing that, don't do that, that's wrong, you should just get along with people and not be trying to convert them or things like that, what are you doing? You're saying, hey, you guys are wrong, stop doing what you're doing and change your behavior, and we're going to tell you how to behave. Wait, isn't that what you're telling us not to do? You're doing that. You're lecturing all of us, telling us we're all wrong and that we all need to obey you and see things the way you see them. So, kind of hypocritical nonsense there. But it is a pretty common attitude of lots of people. What should the Christian view be on something like this? And the other problem I have with this is, if that's what you actually mean, hey, stop trying to tell people they're wrong and stop trying to convert people, then, I mean, it kind of assumes that no one's right on this, except you, of course, right? Because if someone were right, it would make sense for that group to show other groups that they're right. So if you're saying, hey, don't do that, it's like you're assuming that everyone is wrong except you. And it assumes that people don't want to know they're wrong if they are wrong. Like if I'm wrong, I would really, really, really like to know it. If Islam were true, I would really, really, really like to know that. And so if you have some great argument or some knockdown case for Islam, I would love to hear it. If I'm wrong about what please tell me I'm wrong. Please show me I'm wrong if I am. So this assumes that people don't want to know. And of course, there are people who don't want to know. And you know how you can tell the difference? You can just ask them, do you want to know? Right? You can say, hey, we're talking about something. Hey, I got a question for you. If you're wrong, do you want to know it? And if they say no, okay, fine, we'll talk about football then. But if they say yes, then that's kind of an invitation. It's kind of an invitation. So if you're talking to a Muslim, you say, hey, I know what you believe now. I have a question. If you were wrong about Muhammad, and if you were wrong about Jesus, and you were wrong about the Bible, would you want to know that? And Muslims are generally going to say yes. They might at first say, but I'm not wrong. I didn't ask you. I didn't say you're wrong. If you're wrong, would you want to know that? And so basically me, my wife, most of my friends, and so on have all changed positions over time. So, and we're glad that we did. And so the idea that you shouldn't be engaging in these kinds of discussions and trying to figure out what's right and what's true and so on it's a really silly, stupid idea. And so on. But we're going to focus on what the biblical position is here, and we're going to focus, since polemics is the one that is the difficult area for most people. Will put a little more emphasis on polemics. And we're going to eventually see how they all tie together, because they all tie together, and in a really important way. So, apologetics. There are lots of passages in the Bible, especially the book of Acts, where you see apologetics in action, where you see the apostles go out and they share the gospel, but they also present a case for the gospel. They tell people why they should believe the gospel. And you can see how they're adapting their approach for different groups. The way Peter preaches to Jews is very different from the way the Apostle Paul preaches to pagans in Athens. They present a different kind of case. Because if you look, if Peter's talking to a bunch of Jews, then these are people who already believe in God. They believe in the scriptures. They believe in the prophets. And so you show that Jesus is the fulfillment of the scriptures. When Paul is preaching in Athens, he has to start from, hey, there's a creator. There's a creator, and he has to start from there and then lead them up to the resurrection. So they're adapting their approach, but they're explaining why. And they eventually get to, look, Jesus died on the cross. This was a public event. You can investigate it if you want. And we are the witnesses that he rose from the dead and appeared to us. So they're presenting arguments and evidence. And early on in Christianity, apologetics is built into the system. Apologetics was built into it. If you're going around preaching to people, and if someone's going to accept that message, and accepting that message is going to lead to persecution, they're going to be persecuted over that, you're not going to want to convert unless someone is giving you a good reason. Unless someone is giving you a compelling case for converting, not going to convert to something that is going to get you persecuted. And 1 Peter 3:15 is actually a passage in the context of persecution. And Peter says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." So this is in the context of persecution. Peter says, hey, people are criticizing your beliefs, saying your beliefs are wrong, your beliefs are stupid, you're crazy or whatever, and you need to be ready to be able to defend what you believe. And he says, do this with gentleness and respect. And I've seen people say, aha, you see gentleness and respect, therefore you always need to be very gentle and respectful. And I have no idea how you read the rest of the Bible if you're saying this refers to always being super gentle and respectful, because it's not always the thing to do according to the Bible. Notice this is there are two contexts here. One, this is in the context of apologetics. This is someone who is asking you why you believe what you believe, or criticizing what you believe. And the other, this is in the context of persecution. But let's assume that this is the general principle that applies, even if it's not in the context of persecution. Gentleness and respect, that still makes sense. Someone's asking you, hey, why do you believe this stuff? Okay, there's no reason to be mean. No reason to be mean if someone's asking you, why do you believe in this? Why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you believe in the gospel? Okay, makes sense. You can be gentle and respectful, and that makes sense. So the word that's used here is apologion, and that's where we get our word apologetics for. And the word was a Greek word that referred to a defense in court. So the prosecution brings its charges against a person, and the defense would give their speech, their apology, which again is not what we mean by apology. It's the same thing that we find in the Apology of Plato, where Socrates gives his defense of his actions in Athens. If you read the Apology, Socrates is not apologizing for anything. In fact, he enrages them so much when he's criticizing what's going on in Athens that they sentence him to death over it. There was no apologies from Socrates. And then once they find him guilty, they say, hey, Socrates, what should be your punishment? You got to recommend what your punishment was going to be. And he said, free meals for life. So it's like he's trying to tick them off the entire time. But Socrates was not apologizing. He was defending what he had done in Athens. He was defending himself against the charges and so on. So that's the sort of Greek context of what an apology meant then. And that's what apologetics is. So it's a defense. Someone's bringing accusations against you, and how do you respond to their criticisms? And so that's something that we're all supposed to be able to do. One important thing is notice who's saying this. This is not a brilliant scholar who spoke a bunch of languages and could quote people's own pagan poets to them and so on. That would be the Apostle Paul. This is coming from a fisherman. So think about this. You don't need to be some great scientist or some great philosopher or something like that to do apologetics. Peter, again, was a fisherman. I guarantee you, if you walked up to Peter and said, hey, I think this Christianity thing is stupid, I guarantee you're going to get a pretty good defense of Christianity from this fisherman. And Peter says, that's what we all need to be able to do. And one of the reasons that apologetics kind of fell out of favor in the West, to the point where you do have sometimes Christians who, no, you just preach the gospel, you don't need to be doing this stuff, even though, hey, kind of a command here, straight out of your Bible that you say you believe in. One of the reasons it kind of fell out of favor was Christianity was so successful in spreading, it eventually got to the point where everyone's a Christian. Almost everyone's a Christian in Europe, almost everyone's a Christian in America back in the day. And so you don't need to do apologetics. People already believe. Even if people haven't really accepted the gospel, they still tended to believe that it was true. In other words, if you go back just a few decades, Billy Graham crusades. Billy Graham shows up and preaches, and he gives a simple, clear presentation of the gospel, and thousands of people would come down and accept the gospel. And some Christians looked at that and they said, you see, that's how evangelism is going. He's not doing apologetics, he's not doing polemics, he's just giving a simple presentation of the gospel. That's what we should be doing because look how effective that was. Well, who was Billy Graham talking to? It was generally people who believed it and had never really accepted it and committed to it. In other words, if you went to the audience, almost everyone there believed in God. Almost everyone there believed in the Bible. Almost everyone there believed in Jesus. They believed all these things. They just never said, okay, now I accepted it and I'm going to accept Jesus Christ as Lord. So he gives a clear presentation of the gospel to people who already had those beliefs and tells them, all right, now if you believe it, why are you not accepting this? And so people would convert. Okay, that's good. What if you're talking to an atheist who says science has explained everything, we don't need this sort of thing, we don't need this superstition anymore, we've got science. What are you doing if you're talking to a Muslim who believes that Jesus didn't die on the cross, didn't rise from the dead, that he's not Lord, that you're polytheists if you believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, that it would be evil and immoral for Jesus to take the punishment for your sins? What do you do then? Do you not try to show them that your position is actually correct? You just give a simple presentation and say, okay, fine. Do with that what you want? I don't know. Kind of sounds like we're supposed to do apologetics here. So, apologetics, again, if you look at the way the world has been going, early on in Christianity, apologetics built into the system because you're talking to a bunch of people who are raising various kind of challenges. You're preaching something different. They want to know why you believe it. That's where apologetics comes in. Christianity eventually gets to the point where everyone, at least in certain areas of the world, where Christians, it isn't really needed anymore. People aren't doing apologetics, and now we're in a very different situation because now everything's getting jumbled up. Now we have the internet where you can talk to people in other parts of the world. They're going to be raising various kinds of challenges. You guys got a problem back there? Stop apologizing. You got to pick one. Got to pick one. Check, check, check. Want me on this one? Check, check, check. Check. Don't turn this one on. Do that. All right. That better? All right, so, yeah, now all of a sudden, what? Are you guys going to interrupt me every 5 seconds? Every sentence? If people didn't show up in person, how much do they really care? So, you see what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm talking to you people. I'm looking right at you right now. You know who you are. So we are entering a world that is much more similar to the first few centuries of Christianity, where you're talking to a lot of unbelievers. And so Apologetics, absolutely essential, and going to be doing a lot of that here this weekend at the conference. This brings us, of course, to polemics. Not as much agreement on this, but I mean, read this passage and think of it in the context of, hey, you know, don't criticize other people's positions, don't criticize what they think. This doesn't even sound like gentleness to me. Like if we're talking about apologetics, we're supposed to do it with gentleness and respect. Now you're criticizing people's arguments and positions and so on. Look at what the Apostle Paul says here. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. He's talking about waging war, but differently from going out and sending out armies and so on. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. He's talking about waging war against bad ideas here. Correcting the bad ideas. Demolishing bad arguments, bad ideas, things that get in between people and the truth, things that get in between people and the gospel. And you can see this a lot throughout the Bible, but one sort of part of this, one sort of part of criticizing other people's positions that is especially problematic to lots of Christians is the idea that you could criticize and even mock people's positions. You can make fun of them in certain situations. And the reason I want to bring this up is because if you look at the pattern in the Bible, there are criticisms of various positions in the Bible. The occasions when people in the Bible, either prophets or Jesus or apostles, are even mocking people's positions, there's usually only a couple of groups who are the target of that sort of brutal mockery. And so we wanted to take a look at some examples of that because it's going to help us tie everything together. So let's look at some examples of polemics, even involving some serious mockery. So 1 Kings 18:27, this is normally the first thing that people think of. So Elijah having his confrontation with the false prophets, the prophets of Baal. And they had their big showdown where they each put together an altar and so on. They're going to see whose God can actually answer with fire and show that he has accepted the sacrifice. And what does Elijah say here? And at noon, Elijah mocked them. Specifically says he mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is in deep thought, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." So yell louder. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's far away. What's going on? Maybe he's in the bathroom. Some translations actually mess with that, aren't clear on the translation that he's talking about their God going and using the bathroom. He's taking a bathroom break. Maybe that's why he's not here answering your calls on him to act. So that's pretty brutal. That's pretty brutal mockery. One thing you're going to notice is it's pretty vivid imagery. You're talking about your God in the bathroom. Or is your God asleep and you need to shout louder to wake him up? It's going to tie into some other things. But let's take a look at some other passages. Amos 4:1. So he's talking about women here who were wealthy women who were oppressing the poor so that they could live a life of luxury. Look what he says. "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, 'Bring that we may drink.'" So he's talking about women who have husbands. So he's talking about the women. He calls them cows. "Hey, you cows, you just sit around eating all day and so on. You don't do anything else." And so I don't know. There is some sort of context where it's okay for prophets to say, "Hey, you cows." It's interesting to know. Of course, this is an interesting passage about building an idol, the process of building an idol. So, awesome passage in Isaiah. "The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry." Listen to all the vivid details that are being used here. These are meant to stick in your mind. Your mind does a much better job at recalling stuff if it's like picturing things as they're being put out there. He becomes hungry and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. Shapes it with planes and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man with the beauty of a man to dwell in a house. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it, part of this tree he cut down. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over the half he eats meat. He roasts it and is satisfied. Also he warms himself and says, "Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and he falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." That is a pretty accurate description of someone making an idol. If you wanted to make an idol to set up in your house, you go and you chop down a tree and you take some of the wood. And, I got a ton of tree here. I can use this. I can cook some stuff on. And and this is the part I'll use to make this thing that I'm going to bow down to and worship and pray. Please deliver me from whatever's going on. Now, that's the sort of thing. If you look at all of the details in there, that is something that would stick in someone's mind. How, after that is in your mind, how do you then go and could you possibly make an idol without thinking of that? Could you possibly go chop down a tree and I'm going to make this thing, that's going to be in your head right there. But that's all the Old Testament. We don't do all this stuff that's in the Old Testament, so maybe that's not for us. Let's see what Jesus says. So this is Jesus having a showdown with the scribes and Pharisees. And is this being nice? I don't think he's very nice here. Another question. Is he being loving? Yes, he is. I've heard people, you criticize that person and hurt his feelings. That's not loving. Like, according to you, Jesus was very unloving here. I would say he was telling these people exactly what they needed to hear. I mean, this is exactly what they needed to hear. And I don't think that's unloving. In fact, I think you can make a very good case it's more unloving not to tell them. Well, let's go ahead and read what he says. "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves." Just watch the things about, traveling over land and sea and so on. Again, once you've heard this is the sort of thing that sticks in your head. Then you go and do it. Is this going to be in your head? This rebuke is constantly going to be in your mind when you're doing the things that he points out. "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools." Gosh, blind fools? Here's the thing. If I were to call someone blind fool, I get all sorts of Christians. You can't say that. Well, I don't know. It kind of depends on who you're talking to. "For which is greater, the gold of the temple that is the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Think about this. You tithe mint and dill and cumin, so on. You're tithing even your spices. Guess what? These guys did tithe their spices. They just heard, if you just heard Jesus, and this is in your head, and then you go and you tithe your spice, it's going to bring this back to your memory. Look at this. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. The Old Testament contains a list of things you're not allowed to eat. The gnat was the smallest thing, the smallest of the unclean things. You're not allowed to eat these things. So the extremely religious, the very devout, the Pharisees and the scribes, when they were going to even have a cup of water, they would filter it through a cloth just to make sure they didn't accidentally swallow a tiny gnat and make themselves unclean. So you walk around, and anytime these guys are about to have a drink of water, you want a cup of water, they're over there filtering what they're doing through a cloth to make sure they don't accidentally swallow a gnat. And Jesus says, you're worried about that, and look at all the evil stuff you're doing. You're swallowing a camel. So Jesus points out how ridiculous it is that you're obsessed with these little things and you're missing much, much bigger things that you're doing. Once you've heard that, and then you're thirsty. Notice, every time you're thirsty for the rest of your life, every time you're thirsty, you want to drink water. And you, an extremely devout Pharisee, got to filter this water through a cloth. You're remembering that. That's sticking in your head. That's what that Jesus guy said. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may also may be clean. And so now every time they're eating, anytime they're doing anything, using any sort of dish, now they got to be reminded of the words of Jesus. And of course, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Now, every time they walk by a tomb, they have to think, according to Jesus, that's what I am. I'm like this nice tomb, and every time they're painting the outside of the tomb so it looks nice and beautiful, they're thinking, inside it's filled with dead men's bones and decay and so on. And Jesus is saying, I'm like that. Pretty brutal passage to the people who would have been most respected in that culture. And there are plenty more examples from the Apostle Paul and from Peter. We'll just read this one, Galatians 5:12. He's talking about the Judaizers, the people who were telling people that they had to convert to, if you were a Gentile, to become a Jew, you had to convert to Judaism in order to understand the gospel. And Paul does not like that idea. And he says, I wish that those who are troubling you would even castrate themselves. In context, he's talking about circumcision. He's saying, if they're telling you you need to convert to Judaism, you need to be circumcised, and they're saying, by cutting off a little bit of your private parts, this will make you closer to God than Jesus did through the gospel and what he did for you. They're thinking that cutting off a little of your private parts brings you closer to God than Jesus did. Then, my goodness, cut it all off. Just chop it all off. Show us you really believe this. Now, does he really want people going around and doing that? No, he's just flat out mocking their thought. You've got the gospel now. You've got the gospel now. Why are you obsessing over these kinds of things? And so we see this Old Testament, New Testament. We see it from the apostles. We see it from the prophets. We see it from Jesus. Quite a bit of criticism and mockery going on. And when you see them using mockery, they fill it with details that will stick in your minds. Now, if you look at the various groups that are on the receiving end of this criticism, it's not random people. It doesn't walk up to a random person, especially like social outcasts and stuff, and start brutally insulting them and so on. If you look at the people who are typically on the receiving end of this kind of brutal criticism, mockery, and so on, it's oppressors, it's false prophets, it's false teachers, and it's hypocritical religious leaders. So people who are saying one thing but doing something worse. So you've got oppressors, false prophets, false teachers, hypocritical religious leaders. And so if the point here is if there's ever a time to use mockery and criticism and so on, it would be with someone like that. I point that out because I hear all the time I should not be criticizing and making fun of Muhammad for various things. And I'm sitting there looking at the Bible going, I mean, oppressor, check. False prophet, check. False teacher, check. Hypocritical religious leader, this is the guy who told his followers you can marry up to 4 wives, and then he went and married 9 or 11 or more, depending on which source you go to. You get 4, I get more, right? So, I mean, this guy checks every single box of someone who would be on the receiving end of pretty brutal criticism and rebuke. And yet, as soon as you do that, you get bombarded. You get bombarded by Christians telling, hey, you can't do that. You're going to hurt someone's feelings. You can't hurt anyone's feelings, right? You don't want to do that. And I'm sorry, but that's just not, well, I'm sorry. Sorry, but that's just not the biblical position. In other words, if anyone in history is worthy or deserving of criticism and mockery, it would be false prophets who lead massive numbers of people astray. And that's the underlying pattern. False prophets lead, it's not just them. It's not just them and their decision, and they make their own decision and they choose not to obey God. These are people who lead other people along with them. And in order to expose them, they get rebuked, often in front of everyone else, so that everyone else gets the point as well. The people that they are misleading, the people that they are leading astray, you expose them in front of those people so that they see the problem, so they realize this is not a person I should be following here. This is not a person, I should not be going down this person's, the same road with this person. So that's the pattern we actually find in the Bible. And so what you find biblically is if you're engaging with people, you're going to find different sorts of people in different sorts of positions. You're going to find people who they just need a gospel presentation. The people who only need a gospel presentation tend to be people where some groundwork was already laid before. Like they already believe in God, they already believe in Jesus, they already believe in the Bible, something like that, and you just give them a gospel presentation. Can be other people. We've seen that happen before. You preach the gospel to someone and they accept the gospel. So you have people like that. Other people, they have all sorts of doubts. They have all sorts of doubts about the things you're saying. Those would be people who you want to make sure that they understand what the gospel is, but then you also want to show them why it's true. And then there are people who are oppressing others and leading other people astray. And there are, according to the Bible, times when you would definitely want to criticize their positions and even, in certain circumstances, subject them to mockery. So we read, bumper sticker like this, coexist. I'll just give you a little example, because Apologetics has always, even before I became a Christian, has always been ingrained in my thinking. No one gave me any case for Christianity when I was young, with the slight exception of my grandmother, who one day we were in the kitchen and she just said, "Look at the hand, isn't it amazing? I mean, doesn't it look like it's designed?" And that was it. That was the only apologetics I ever got in my entire life, till I was in jail. And if you've ever seen my testimony video, I met a Christian who, that was the first guy who was actually doing apologetics. I'd heard people preach the gospel. I'd never seen anyone give me a reason to think that the gospel is true. Eventually in jail, met a Christian named Randy, and he was doing both. Randy was not mean. Randy was not insulting or really criticizing. He just had an annoying habit of questioning things that I would say, which was important because I was making up a lot of things I was saying. We were having I'm sure you've seen people like that. You have a disagreement and you go, but all scientists agree on this. Every historian in the world agrees. Really? You interviewed every historian in the world and assembled the data. Really? No, that's how I would respond. But Randy would go, "Really? They do?" And he would just look at me, right? Like, you know that's not true. You know you're making that up, right? But this is very, if you've ever read Greg Koukl's Tactics, that's foundational. If you want to get involved in apologetics and so on, just the art of asking people questions about what they're claiming. Where did you get that? Say, all scientists say, really, where did you get that idea? Where did you get that? Why do you believe that? How did you come to that conclusion? And then letting people explain or try to explain how they came to this conclusion. And in reality, it's usually something I heard at some point from some friend, or I heard from this person or something like that, and it never went anything beyond that. You heard it, no, okay, that makes sense, and I'll just go with that. There was never any investigation, nothing like that. And it's important for people to realize, it was very important for me to realize this, that I was sitting there accusing this Christian, and by the way, if you don't know the story, this is a guy who turned himself in for 21 felonies. He became a Christian, went into a police station and said, here's everything I've ever done. And they said, oh, that's 21 felonies. And so they locked him up, and he's in there with me. And we start arguing about Christianity. And so very interesting fellow, but he was actually, he knew why he believed in the gospel. And he got me to thinking about it. And eventually I became a Christian and spent time in jail and prison, and then got out. And a lot of you have heard of Nabil Qureshi and so on, so met him. But there were other people along the way, like my wife. My wife was an agnostic when we met. In fact, I met my wife when Nabil and I were arguing about the resurrection. Nabil and I are arguing about the resurrection. My wife steps up and says, you're both right. She's like this. She was like this. She was an agnostic, but she's like a kind of a friendly agnostic till we started arguing. Then she got a little meaner. We liked arguing so much that we got married. But so Nabil and I are arguing about the resurrection. She walks up and says, you're both right. And Nabil and I both turned it like, what in the name of common sense are you talking about here? I'm saying he rose from the dead. He's saying he didn't rise from the dead. Those are the possibilities here. One of us is right and one of us is wrong. There is no, she means, of course, is, something like this. Your religious beliefs are, they're true for you, but they're not really true, but they're true for you. So come on, you're both right. Why are you guys arguing? And it's actually, that's a good example of a person with certain ideas. My wife became a Christian about 2 weeks later. We just started discussing these things, and her view was similar to mine, that science explains everything and so on. So once you start seeing these issues, right? And she had been raised as a Catholic. So notice, she believed that Jesus died on the cross. She believed that he rose from the dead. She believed that he's Lord. And then she went to college, lost her belief, and just didn't believe it was true anymore. But notice, she didn't have a problem with any of those things. She just didn't believe it was true because she didn't believe in God anymore. And then so we went through that, and she believed in God again. Oh, okay, now I do believe in Jesus. So that was her, 2 weeks. Nabil, 4 years. 4 years talking to Nabil. And just so you know, for 4 years, there were Christians telling me, dude, you're wasting your time on this guy. He's too hard-hearted. You've been preaching to him all this time, having all these discussions, and he's still not believing. And my view was, I do not believe that we ended up in the same room together by coincidence. And as long as he keeps coming back, I'm going to believe that he's drawn. But I'm not going to say, oh, you're taking too long here. And notice, this is not, you just give a person a gospel presentation. A Muslim is not understanding everything you're saying. He's understanding very little of what you're saying. Almost every word you're using, he interprets differently. You have to get through that. You have to clarify everything. He doesn't think you have any reason to believe what you're saying. And he believes he has awesome arguments for his position. And so this is why I wanted to point out how all of this comes together. In Evangelism, apologetics and polemics are actually part of evangelism. You don't always need them. You don't always need apologetics. You don't always need polemics. It depends on the person, the situation. But Nabil, after he became a Christian, so 4 years goes by, Nabil eventually becomes a Christian. And he told me afterwards, he said, after we went for a few years, and we were discussing the evidence for Jesus' crucifixion, the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, the evidence that Jesus is Lord, the Trinity, the reliability of the New Testament, he said, I was thinking, he never admitted this, but he said, he did eventually, but he didn't admit it while we were going through this, but he said, I was thinking Christians actually have good reasons for what they believe. He said, I realized Christians had good reasons for believing that the New Testament documents are reliable. He said, I realized that Christians had good reasons for believing that Jesus died on the cross. He said, I realized you guys had good reasons for the things you believe. He said, but I also was thinking, even if they show me with 99% certainty everything they believe, I'm still 100% sure that Islam is true. And therefore, Christianity always loses. It doesn't matter how good your case is. You can show him with 99% certainty that it's true. He's still going to believe in Islam because he's 100% certain that Islam is true because of the scientific miracles in the Quran and because of the miraculous, perfect preservation of the Quran, because Muhammad is the greatest man who ever lived, all these arguments that he had. It wasn't until he saw that those arguments are actually bad and that lots of the claims that Muslim da'is, their preachers, use are filled with false claims. That's when he started doubting Islam, and that's what allowed him to take the gospel seriously. And so, again, it's going to depend on the situation of the person. But if you're dealing with someone who is like a hardened atheist or a Muslim or something like that, who has beliefs that are sometimes radically opposed to what you believe, then you're definitely going to have to do some apologetics. And you may need to do some polemics. If they think there's some better case for something else over there, what's the Apostle Paul say? We demolish arguments. We have to demolish them. And that's how all three of these things tie together. For evangelism, notice, and at the end of the day, the goal is the evangelism, but part of evangelism has to be these other things. And so it's easy, I'll just say it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get discouraged when you look around at the world. Seems like really insane right now. Well, guess what? You go back to the early centuries of Christianity. Things were pretty insane back then too. Pretty insane. And so we look, and you've got the Muslim world, and you've got atheism, which has exploded in popularity in recent years. You've got all kinds of really weird stuff, like everyone went off the deep end. Hey, we got drag queen story hour and stuff like this, and all sorts of really weird things going on. But I would say, from my view, we're like in the best time in history. If we want to reach people with the gospel and do apologetics and polemics where necessary, this is the greatest time in history. You could talk to a Muslim in Saudi Arabia on your phone right now. 14 centuries of Christians could not have dreamed of having that opportunity that we have right now. And I would say, if you're worried about all the insane things that are going on in the world right now, and it really does seem like that, I think we're on the verge of having a pretty knockdown argument for Christianity. When people are saying, hey, if we just get rid of this Christianity stuff, we'll enter this new period of rationality and scientific reasoning and so on. You look, and like 5 seconds later, they all lose their minds. Well, guess what? People are catching on to that. People are catching on to how rapidly people lose their minds as soon as they're turning away from the gospel. And so we're about to be able to point it out to them. And so apologetics, evangelism, polemics, these are all connected. They all go hand in hand. And that's what we're going to be going through, quite a bit of that at this conference. And we've got a lot of people here who've been doing this for years, have a lot of experiences, and can share what they've learned.
Thank you so much to David Wood for the awesome introduction to this conference. Now we will have Hatun Taj here to show us some of the reasons why it matters so much that Christianity is indeed different to Islam, as David alluded to.